As a follow-up to episode 40, where I discussed the collective loss from the pandemic, this episode will center around what we've individually gained. It will also be my first attempt to curate and edit a CommunityPod, which, like QuickPods, will be shorter in format and focus on one idea. With CommunityPods, I'm hoping to bring many diverse voices into one episode to share unique ideas on a specific topic. For this episode, I asked all of the people you'll hear from to send in a 1-minute voice recording from their phone. I wasn't very specific with the request, but just asked that they share in the prompt what you gained during the pandemic. I'm Jarrett Carpenter, and this is Wifi Water. When I began to edit this episode, I'll be honest, I didn't really have a mental map for how it would all come together. So I'm really going for an open mic feel where each guest gets the mic in 1 minute to share what they gained during the pandemic. And with no further preamble, I'll go first and briefly share what I gained during the pandemic. And then we'll pass the mic to someone else. What did I gain during the pandemic? I gained perspective by the gallon during the pandemic. From losing a company seemingly overnight to COVID-19's international travel restrictions, to moving back in with my parents, only then to move out months later on my own. However, one of the biggest proponents of perspective has been sitting courtside as a son to the aging of my parents, seeing close up how Alzheimer's and dementia has taken my mother, and my father's cardiac struggles has been humbling to say the least. The pandemic has also provided me with an immense amount of creative space from which Wi-Fi and Water and an English Premier League-focused podcast called Boys and Bolos emerged. To sum it up, the pandemic has been a humbling journey of perspective while in constant transition. Eric, you're up next. Why don't you tell us what you gained during the pandemic?
What I gained during the pandemic, we all gained a new J. Cole album during the pandemic, so grateful for that. Also gained the experience of living in the Candelaria in Bogota, Colombia, and moving 2 times within the Candelaria. There was no people around because of the pandemic, so kind of feeling the raw energy of the past, the present, and the future of Bogota in such an important and dreamlike place. I got to write while on the rooftop there, so gained a lot of perspective and insight into life.
Eric, thanks so much for those wise words. Emily, you're up next. You ready? All right. Why don't you tell us what you gained during this pandemic?
Hello, my name is Emily Ouellet, and I spent the pandemic living with my husband and our brand new puppy, who quickly became an anxious pandemic dog. The way I spent the pandemic and what I gained from the pandemic was learning about how I spend my energy and what I give to others and how I need to give back to myself. I think of myself as a very outgoing, gregarious, extroverted person, but I also noticed that I need a lot of time to recharge when I've been really giving of that energy and extroverted tendencies. As a mental health counselor and a coach of sports, I find myself just going and giving and not always being as tuned in with what I need to recharge myself. So the pandemic definitely gave me better insight on how to fill my cup back up.
Emily, thank you so much. Next up on the mic is Dick David. Dick, are you ready? All right, passing the mic over. You sure you're ready? All right, here you go, man. Good luck.
I'm Dick David from Nigeria. When the virus entered the country, I was still in the university. So when the lockdowns were announced, most of the students rushed back home, but I stayed back, which meant that I was isolated from both friends and family for a prolonged period of time. I used this time though to complete the books which I've been writing for about 2 years, back then. And the rest of the time I used it to work out and study and just think basically about my life and relationships. There wasn't really much to do though. Then I realized that I've only been emotionally available for both my friends and family, and that time really helped me reevaluate things.
Dick David, thank you so much. Who's up next? Anybody? All right, Vanessa, you want to go? That's what's up. You ready? All right, let's go to New York. Vanessa, what did you gain during the pandemic?
Self-acceptance around my character, my personality, and my behaviors. And I think the pandemic has kind of helped me realize that it's okay to want to just stay home because not everyone's constantly on. Do you know what I mean? Like clicked in, engaged, etc. And I think I've always been very much of a homebody, but I've always guilted myself about it, especially living in New York City and then being a homebody. It's like I'd always get a lot of flack for wanting to stay home all the time. Yeah.
Vanessa, thank you so much for sharing. Last but not least, Mike, you're up. You ready to go? All right, I'm going to pass you the mic. Why don't you tell us what you gained during the pandemic?
Hi, my name is Mike DeLodge, and during the pandemic I was living in Washington, D.C., and then started to make plans to move in with someone for the next step in the relationship, and those plans then fell apart. So I wound up moving back in with my father in my childhood home in Concord, New Hampshire, and what I gained was just a tremendous amount of quality time with my parents and with my siblings. I'd been living outside of New England for the better part of the last 2 decades, so being back in New England and having that time to spend a lot of good quality time with them, and not just the catching up on kind of a weekend in town type thing, but just spending so much time together was tremendously valuable. And I think I have the best relationship I have with both my parents and my siblings that I've had in probably my entire life, if not a long time. Thanks.
Mike, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much to all 5 guests for taking the time to sit down and record on the prompt of what you gained during the pandemic. And if you're listening to this, think about doing the same. Find the voice recording feature on your phone, sit down, and leave yourself a little note on what you gained during the pandemic. It'll be something very cool to check out in 2 weeks, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, whatever time horizon you want to put on it. And I also want to say that even though it's framed in the past tense, the pandemic is very much still a part of our lives and will continue to be into the future. If you like community pods and you have an idea for a future community pod, please reach out and hit us up on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Wifi Water Podcast. Thanks again, and we'll see everyone next time.